that I wrote, perhaps 8 or 10 themes which either concern me, interest me, or puzzle me, and we can discuss those one after the other. I can talk to them one after the other, or we can have them one by one with a few questions each time. But before I begin that, I want to see how observant you are, and I want to spend about 5 minutes doing a little test. I'm going to pass this picture round, and at the end I'm going to ask you, is it man or woman? And you'll just raise your hands up, one or the other. Just a little test of observation. If you know the answer, please don't tell anyone. Okay? Can we do this quickly? Can you just do it quickly, otherwise we'll take half an hour. Just quickly make up your minds, man or woman, male or female. And then don't speak your answer. I've shown this to many hundreds of medical people, including professors, consultants, surgeons, and it's interesting the wide variety of answers. In the meantime, perhaps as it's going to take about 10 minutes to go round, I'll discuss a little political issue first. Now, I'm just going to make a slight apology in advance. I do a lot of lecturing, but I never use notes. I just ad-lib, and I tend to talk very fast. So it's going to be a bit of a strain to me to talk slowly. But if I read the first part, at least, that will help me. And this first part is not a nutritional issue. It's really a political issue. So I'll go ahead and read. Now, last October the 29th, Agricultural Minister John Gunner addressed the meat traders' annual conference at the Butchers' Hall. He was reported in all the media as saying that vegetarianism is a fad diet, that the number of vegetarians is not increasing, and that humans are natural omnivores. Now, the word fad means the latest fashion or a passing phase. However, the vegetarian concept has been about a very long time, and there are many biblical, classical, and modern references to it. Many great and famous people have become vegetarian. The English Vegetarian Society was founded over 150 years ago, and the Vegan Society first met in London in 1944. By the way, sometimes I say vegetarian, sometimes I say vegan. Please excuse me over that. I'll use the word vegan, but as a comprehensive term, included to mean vegetarians as well. Okay? The Vegetarian Society in 1991 sponsored a survey conducted independently by Bradford University. Based on random interviews of 3,500 people, the results indicate that there were at that time 3.6 million vegetarians in the UK, and that 48% of people had recently reduced their red meat intake. I should add that I think in 1980 there were 1 million vegetarians, so that in the nearly a dozen years the number had gone up by 3.5 times. Also, that as many as 30,000 people a week, youngsters in particular, were adopting the vegetarian diet, some fad. Zoological texts indicate that natural omnivores have 4 hooved feet. Remember, Gummer said that humans are natural omnivores. Zoological texts indicate that natural omnivores have 4 hooved feet, eyes which point sideways, abdominal teats or breasts, and that they possess tails, amongst many other non-human attributes. John Gummer agreed to be interviewed live on Sky TV News that same night, and at the same night as he gave his talk. And then I was invited, I think from a recommendation from the Vegetarian Society, although I'm a vegan, that I was also invited to be present at the interview. When I arrived at the studio, I was informed that Mr. Gummer would not be attending. He was told that I would then be coming. In the event, the 4 minutes live slot remember, in the news time at 9 o'clock, prime time, the 4-minute live slot lasted for 7.5 minutes, after which the producer asked for my professional card, saying that at some future date he would like to produce a full program on vegetarianism. He said it was really fascinating and he really went on much longer than he had planned. Later, I was informed that Mr. Gummer had again withdrawn from an interview on a different channel the following night, and for similar reasons. Could it be intellectual uncertainty rather than ministerial duties which caused this double withdrawal? In the event, I wrote a long and informed but restrained letter to the minister and invited his reply. Not receiving any acknowledgement to my letter after 5 months, I contacted my own MP, who is of the same party as Mr. Gummer. His sympathetic reply stated that, and I quote this, that he suspected that however informative my letter, it would not have made any difference to John Gummer. My MP concluded that his successor, who was subsequently elected, is a vegetarian, and we have corresponded faithfully since, corresponded fruitfully since. And he is, there's a member of the Bromley Society here, and John Gummer, I believe, the MP is now going to come to one of our meetings. Kathy Silk told me last week.
What is the name of the MP?
The local MP, Niels Merchant.
Good.
Right, has that thing gone all the way around yet?
Yeah.
Where is it at the moment?
Yeah.
Oh. Well, look, I'll tell you what. Let me have it now. We've got enough who have seen it to make it, give it an opinion. Can you pass that up to the front, please?
Microphone be pushed just a few inches that way. It's right in the middle of his face. On the screen it looks absolutely fine.
Now, are there enough of you who have seen it, who are familiar with what the inside looks like, to make an opinion as to whether it's male or female, or man or woman? Who would say it's man? Who would say it's a woman? You would say man. Well, look, there's an overwhelming majority who say man. Should I tell you you're all wrong? Yeah. You're looking at the gorillas inside. That's it. You see, it's irrelevant, male or female. It's a gorilla. And I've shown this to professors of medicine. I've shown it to surgeons, and not one has ever got it right. They argue and quibble on finer points of elbow angle, shape of hips, and so on, as to whether it's male or female, but not one has ever said it's not human. Now, why do I say this? Because it's so similar to the human digestive system that one, I think, is entitled to suspect that maybe our diets should be somewhat similar. And what does a gorilla live on? It's essentially, let's say, a frugivore, essentially a plant-eating animal living on vegetation. Now, a few points that may interest you. Let's take, say, the cat family, the felines. Lions, tigers, cougars, pumas, domestic cats, cheetahs. They're all members of the cat family, okay? They're different species, but within a family of animals, and they all eat likewise. I don't think anyone will argue on that point. Huh? Let's take different breeds of dog. Although dogs are much more closely related genetically than because of the selective breeding. But even so, whatever type of dog you've got, they all eat the same. Whatever type of horse you've got, whether it's a zebra or a shire horse or a donkey or a pony, very different animals, different species, but within the equine or horse family, they all eat likewise, don't they? So it's not, I think it's legitimate, if any scientists here, you can always criticise me if they wish, but it is legitimate to extrapolate from that if members, different species within a family, all eat very similarly, that the human, as a member of the anthropoid ape family, of the higher primates, would eat similarly to the other higher primates. And when you judge what a normal diet is for a member of that family, you don't take in the human diet into account, because that's very artificial or very synthetic, the way it's prepared and processed. There are 5,000 species of mammal in the world today, but only one species that will actually moderate it or modify its food. Pardon? Okay, so therefore I feel it's legitimate to say that we eat similar to the other higher primates, the gorillas, chimps and orangutans. And gorillas they're not really strictly vegan, in the sense that a gorilla will eat occasionally some insects or a bird or a frog or a lizard. But by observations, field studies done in nature by scientists who will walk around with binoculars and spend 6 months in the field observing and documenting every item of food that a higher primate will eat, and then assessing its weight and then analysing out its food content, its nutrients, show that gorillas will have up to about 1% of animal protein and over 99% of plant protein. Orangutans will have up to 2% animal protein, and chimps, who public, having seen 1 or 2 TV programs last year, mistakenly think are carnivores, chimps will have up to 4 or 5% animal protein. Further studies show that a chimp will eat up to about 2.4 grams of animal protein a day, which is about 3 or 4% of its total protein intake. So the rest is all plant protein. And chimps also tend to eat animals, or kill occasionally a bush boar or a baby gibbon or something like that, only when they're under some form of stress, or when their tree cover is being removed, when their woodland is being destroyed. Chimps, which are more relaxed and are not, shall we say, hunted down, tend to be purely plant-eating animals. So from this we can see that we probably genetically are much more closely allied to plant-eating animals. I'm prepared to say that on a Darwinian point of view, there has been perhaps a little evolutionary digression away from that, because of our habitat has moved away from woodland. But even though we have a certain facility for eating animal products, we still have retained an excellent facility for plant products. A few other pieces of information which are perhaps worth noting is that dogs differ from each other genetically by about 20% in their DNA, their amino acid sequences. Horses, which all eat similarly, differ from each other genetically by about 5%, and they all eat the same. Humans and other higher primates differ from each other genetically by a factor of 0.9 to about 1.1%. So genetically we are so close to our cousin higher primates that I think it's quite legitimate to say that we can eat similarly to them as frugivores. Okay, now what I'll probably do is, rather than just read through all my themes, let's do a theme at a time. If I get through 2 or 3, great, so it means lots of questions. If the questions aren't so profuse, then I'll have time to read more themes. Does anyone want to make any comment on what I've said so far? Or ask any question?
I'm just a bit puzzled now as to whether you classify humans as omnivores with B12 They're certainly not herbivores.
No, they're classified as frugivores.
I mean, is that your classification, or is that the accepted
Well, zoologically, if you, in fact I've got a pamphlet here about it, if you class humans, if you look at all the physical, anatomical, physiological characteristics of omnivores, herbivores, carnivores, frugivores, you'll find that we possess all the identical, make a list of the 20 main features. We possess the 20 features of the frugivores. There are differences in nature of womb and nature of afterbirth, placenta, which are typical of the frugivores which we possess. We don't possess the typical features of an omnivore or herbivore placenta. Also, you see omnivores herbivores don't, and carnivores don't have sweat glands like we do, but frugivores do have sweat glands.
Sorry, can you perhaps give an example? The frugivores then are just the higher.
Well, the higher primates, yes.
And omnivore, pig is
Pig is an omnivore, yes.
right.
Okay, yes?
That being the case, if we are genetically closer to chimpanzees than, say, horses are amongst themselves, why are we not omnivores or carnivores?
Well, because we have the anatomical and physiological features of a frugivore.
Yeah.
But the point is, I tend to prefer the term, I coined it myself, there are two types, there are opportunistic and obligate. The obligate, say, frugivore is rigidly frugivore and nothing else. But the opportunistic one is being realistic within the society that we live. Sometimes it's almost impossible. I mean, to take the example I often quote, you wouldn't, if you were drinking a cup of tea which happened to be made of bone china, you theoretically you shouldn't drink it because there's bone. If you've seen these cups made, you see bone powder being put into it. Or you wouldn't drive it as a doctor. I couldn't drive a car to visit a patient urgently because animal oils or greases are sometimes used in the engine assembly. But I've got to be just a little careful here because I'm going to go right off into a tangent on something which I only wanted to just mention to start with. Is it a lady here?
I just had a question because you said that omnivores have hooved feet, but I thought that the bear was an omnivore. Is that right? And how does it?
Oh, well, now I've got to be a little careful here because I'm not a zoologist. Perhaps I think you are more than I am.
Not that kind.
But I've read. I'm not a zoologist. I've read around the subject and got so to be an overwhelming mass of information pointing one way. It may be that I know that bears are both are omnivores. It may be that within their natural habitat they'll tend to be mainly perhaps a carnivore or perhaps mainly herbivore. But if an opportunity arises, that's what I mean by they may be opportunistic herbivores. In other words, if they're hungry, if a bear is on a desert island, and there was nothing else to eat but perhaps pigs or something, he would become a carnivore. In other words, when survival is at stake, then you'll cross the boundaries of your normal eating pattern. Well, perhaps take one or two more questions. Yes.
What is the ideal diet of a frugivore?
Well, it's again, I would say, what is the ideal diet of a frugivore? Well, again, I think you would want to discuss this with a primatologist like Jane Goodall or Diane Fossey. But essentially, it's leaves, plant stems, roots, and fruits, and the products of those plants. There was one question at the back.
Panda in China, is that an omnivore turned herbivore by circumstances? It's very selective.
Yes, I read that recently. I was a bit puzzled as you are. I don't think I can talk on any authority. The point is animals do cross the border of their dietary patterns when they're under some form of stress. As I said, chimpanzees do. And it may well be that a panda, if left to itself, will be essentially a bamboo-eating animal, but when the forest cover is being damaged and it's being more and more pushed in, and then they'll tend to transgress that. I presume that's it, but I can't again answer that with authority. Okay, one more question, then I'll get on with some other themes. Yes?
How much gorilla gets it?
Well, that's a curious one, which I should be mentioning later. But perhaps to allay your curiosity, I'll mention it very briefly now. Gorillas are observed by these field workers to occasionally eat their own stools. Now, I can think of better ways of, more socially acceptable ways of getting B12 than eating your own feces, but it's speculated that may be one of the ways that gorillas get their own B12. Whether that is not, because you see, rabbits and some other herbivores, all mammals need B12, but there are many strictly herbivore mammals. And but having said that, you see, even strict Asian vegans don't get B12 deficiency because the cereal grains they eat often contain mice droppings, and even the river water has been shown to contain minimal amounts of B12. But that will come later.
All other animals appear to select their food as a result of instinct. Why is it that we've lost that instinct, or did we never have it in the first place?
Again, this is really an anthropological question. The diet that we have today is very recent from an evolutionary point of view. Until, first of all, I've discussed this with anthropologists, quite a number of them, from University College, the head of the anthropology department. I discussed it with with Chris Skinner, who's head of anthropology at the Royal Science Museum, Kensington, and with other people. And it appears that the human was never a great hunter, never a great meat eater in the past, until the Ice Ages, when much of the Earth's surface, up to 75%, was covered with permafrost. That means always frozen below about 18 inches. And in order to survive, they had to change their dietary pattern. No doubt many humans died. I mean, the Eskimos are a typical example of that today. But with the recession of the last Ice Age, about 12,000 years ago, something strange happened for the first time in human pre- and current history. And that was the advent of farming. That may have been chance or design, but the advent of farming created a whole change in human eating patterns, because you see, for the first time in human history and prehistory, there was a surplus of food. Once you've got farming, you have a food surplus. But then something else happens. You stop becoming nomadic. You stop foraging for your food. You eat it where it grows. And that created a major social change, the establishment of the village. Because once you grow food, you have a village established. Once you've got your village and your surplus of food, you can apportion land to domestication of animals. And for the first time, there was meat available. And then once you've got domestication of animals, you can start a dairy farming. And it's evident that the farming started, certainly apart from some recent evidence that it may have started in China 25,000 years ago, most farming started about 10,000 years ago. And dairy farming started about 6,000 to 7,000 years ago, probably with sheep and goats. The people who own the land, you see, people, once you have a social system, you start getting the boss man and the worker. And the bosses own the land. They were the people who had the meat. The working class still lived, certainly in Babylonian times, it's estimated that the vast majority of the working class lived on plant foods, were still almost vegan. But you see, it's a social characteristic that everyone wants to be like the guy in the class above him. And they say, if meat's good enough for you, I want meat. And the growth of the eating of meat in society appears to be largely an outcome of the wealthy and the powerful being meat eaters, and the working class wanting to eat them. Now, in fact, taking a more modern look, people imagine that the roast beef of old England and all that business, but that was largely a fiction. The roast beef of old England applied to between 2 and 5% of the whole community, of the whole population of this country. The population of this country was, say, 95% of working village people, and the 2 to 5% was the court and the church, the crown and the church. They were the only literate people. They were the wealthy ones. They were the landowners. And if you think of pictures of Friar Tuck or King Henry VIII, they were big fat people. But the working class were big, strong people, but muscular and slim. The working class only went downhill after the Industrial Revolution, when they moved to towns and started. The wealthy people were eating white bread, because white was the sign of godliness and purity. And if white bread is good enough for those bloody rich people, then what about us? We want the same. And the biggest mistake the working class ever made was to try to eat as the wealthy people had. But this is another subject. I'm getting right away from my theme. I'm giving you a talk on the history of nutrition. Look, what I've done is, as I said, I've selected about a dozen themes. I've written little bits around them, and we'll see how they go. Right. The former dean of a postgraduate teaching hospital went vegan at my suggestion about 4 years ago with a rapid and gratifying clinical response. His chronic dyspepsia improved sufficiently in days for him to greatly reduce his medication. 2 years later, following a routine blood test, he reported that his hemoglobin level had fallen from its usual 15.5 grams, and Jill, perhaps you comment on this later, it's fallen from 15.5 grams to 13.5 grams. Concern at this led him to resume a very modest omnivorous diet, and gradually his hemoglobin rose to 15.5 grams again. I suspect the professor's blood at 13.5 grams was, assuming other blood indices were normal, was fully adequate for his bodily needs, and that the 15.5 grams related to his original diet, rich in hematinics, which maintained a level greater than needed. I wonder if an unnecessarily high hemoglobin imposes a mild burden on the cardiovascular system in the form of a slightly increased blood viscosity and pressure. Now, on Monday night, I discussed this topic with the head of the research, of medical research at Burroughs Wellcome. Now, that's a very big research institute. And he was intrigued by it, and he confirmed what I thought, in that, you see, as with, say, the pulse rate, what they say that a normal recommended hemoglobin level is about, in men, is about 13.5 to 15.5 grams. In fact, mine's above 15.5, and I'm a vegan, but that's probably because I do a lot of sport. And that's interesting. You see, this professor was 15.5 grams, but he was overweight and never did any sport. And basically, he didn't need 15.5 grams. And it may be that in going vegan and his chronic 4-year indigestion clearing up in a few days, that's because you make much less acid in your stomach, because you don't need so much acid to digest meat. When he went vegan, he didn't need, he didn't have so many hematinics. He had the amount his body was requiring, and it dropped to 13.5, and it stayed there. But that was what he needed. But he wanted it to be higher. So he went back to a mild omnivorous diet, and slowly his hemoglobin rose again. I think actually this was so, because there is, to what I believe, a slight increase in blood viscosity and a slight increase in blood pressure at this. So he may have actually been doing himself a disservice. I could actually go into this in much greater length, but I've given that as something to think about. Now I want to show you another case, a related case. I advised a close friend some years ago with moderate weight and blood pressure and arthritic problems, who was on drugs for all these things, to adopt a near-vegan diet, and happily her problems soon had largely disappeared. Her son then adopted the diet and lost several stone in weight. You know who that is, Marion? Her overweight. She had an overweight daughter living in Israel. So the overweight daughter promptly adopted the diet, and she also lost several stone in weight. So now they have another daughter who was very intrigued by this, and she was also overweight. So she adopted the diet, and she started losing weight rapidly. The diet, of course, is a vegan diet, but a fairly well-balanced one. But something else happened. She has got, I think, a couple of children, but for the last 6-7 years, she'd been fairly anemic. And she had every type of hospital treatment for it, and she remained anemic. Anyway, she adopted the diet, and 5 or 6 months later, she went back to hospital for her routine follow-up, and for the first time in all these years, her hemoglobin had risen, and it was now normal. Any explanations? Well, perhaps she was eating a more balanced diet. Perhaps the diet beforehand was unbalanced. But you see, there's a whole paradox here. What do we do? Anyway, as I said, these two apparently opposing results, what was happening? I leave it to you. But I've written down here that I've come across many cases of dyspepsia, depressed mood, gout, arthritis and rheumatic, skin conditions, diabetes, bowel problems, difficult urinary problems, catarrh, respiratory problems, obesity, and so on, all of which have had very dramatic responses on a change of diet. So as Jill pointed out this morning in perhaps slightly more detailed manner, that there is a profound difference, there is a profound effect, therapeutic effect, in diet in food alone. And this is, to me, another confirmatory point that the human diet is probably meant to be a frugivorous diet. Now, a question children often ask at school is, do plants suffer pain when eaten? You've probably all had this thrown at you before. It's a difficult one to answer, isn't it? Well, this is how I answer it. First of all, that is, should the vegan ethic also apply to plants? Because if it does, then we're in trouble. There is no evolutionary sense in plants having a nervous system and pain awareness if the plant has not evolved a mechanism to avoid that pain. So I don't think plants do suffer pain. Now, it is a simple matter of, if it is a simple matter of survival, say between the cabbage and me, then sadly the cabbage has to go to the wall. Part of the fruitarian philosophy, however, is that eating the fruit does not damage the plant itself. Dr. Alan Long pointed out to me some years ago that those who eat meat cause animals to be fed a far greater amount of plant tissue than we would ever consume ourselves. In other words, in going vegan, although you may perhaps cause a plant to suffer, you cause only 1/10 the amount of plant suffering. So that's a point which is worth bearing in mind if ever this is thrown at you, because I've actually had this thrown at me when lecturing to doctors. You would think that doctors would, perhaps are talking at a slightly higher plane, but that's what they throw, and they're really being sarcastic and trying to have a go at me and ridicule me in front of the audience. Finally, since humans belong to the family of the anthropoid apes, which are frugivores, it seems quite ethical to eat plants which evolved in tandem with us and our dietary habits. Now, does anyone want to ask any questions at this moment? Yes?
You said that from this you conclude that they don't have any feelings or don't suffer any pain. But
Well, I suspect not. I can't prove it, of course.
Yeah, but this is your opinion. Have you read any studies about, like, when you take a plant that you have in your home and you just burn it with fire, for example, that you can sort of have special machines, I don't know how to say it in English.
Yes, they have things like electrocardiographs, and that if you play music or you put pins into it, you can get wave recordings. The person who did all that was then presented with a paper by somebody else who put these things on to stones and bricks and inanimate objects, and then made vibrations in the air and hit the bricks. We've also got wave recordings that could be similar. Look, I'm not an expert in this. I can't really give you a real answer, but I have read around what you've mentioned.
But anyway, I would like to comment that saying that they don't suffer doesn't mean that they are not sensitive.
Yes.
You know, they could just be sensitive to what you're doing to them without really suffering. You know.
You see, the ultimate question is this. We can get by very healthily, I think better than average, if we don't have animal products. But if we don't have any plant products as well, then we might all go and jump down the lavatory and pull the chains after ourselves. No, if we are going to live, then I think the plant will have to pay the price. The back there.
Plants have electromagnetic, but that doesn't mean that they're
No, I mean, they may have a sense. They may be sentient creatures, plants, at a totally different level, which we don't understand.
Really?
And again, I just have to say, well, it may be. I don't know. Yes.
I think you can still try and minimise fertility destruction, so by even more fruit, so you can actually fill the plant.
Yeah.
I think most people might think it's this one as well, but I know some people would consider the question of ethics and conscience regarding sprouting seeds and nuts. So you're creating a young life and just trying to fulfill its potential and then you can cut it off to your own additional desires, which may not actually be necessary. It would just be fruit and leaves.
Well, that can be the formation of a whole new foundation, a whole new school of thought. I'm just touching on the fringes of it, but I can't answer with any authority. Yes? Yeah.
I would like to comment what you said in the beginning about the meat-eating man who got this hemoglobin increased by vegan diet.
No, it reduced on a vegan diet, but it was still a normal level.
Yes, but what I have learned is that with the meat diet, the blood corps are clotted together. So with very high levels with hemoglobin, you get it's very bad to have that high
Yes.
level.
What I think you're trying to say is this. If you take, say, 100 cc mils of blood from 6 hours after a standard Western meal, the blood will settle at a certain rate, and the supernatant fluid, the serum, will be fairly turbid. And if you look at the blood cells under a microscope, you'll find that there's what we call rouleau formation and clumping formation, where all the red cells tend to stick together, and they won't flow so freely through a capillary, and they won't absorb quite so much oxygen. Whereas if you take the blood, say, after a vegan meal, standard vegan meal, the supernatant fluid, 6 hours later, is quite clear. The serum is quite clear and translucent. And the blood cells are discrete. I've got a photomicrograph of that at home, actually. So that, in fact, you probably oxygenate your blood better after a vegan meal than after a meat meal. I discussed this personally with a very well-known cardiologist who is the medical advisor to the Marathon Society. And he actually is almost trying to make short work of me, although he doesn't realise that the marathon runner's diet today is not far off removed from a vegan diet. If you know what the high carbohydrate loading that marathon runners take today. But apparently he said that anyone's blood is fully saturated with oxygen, even if it's following a meat meal. But the physician who I spoke to, the head of the research department at Bowers Wellcome, agreed with me on Monday there is quite a bit difference. The blood cells that all clump together cannot absorb oxygen so well as discrete blood cells. So yes, I know the point you're getting at. Yes?
Do you think you could safely draw the conclusion that vegans would therefore be less susceptible to anaerobic viruses, such as AIDS
Well, this is a research question. I can the best only speculate on this. I know that since I've gone vegan, I used to get at least regularly 3 stinking colds a year, and they would all last, the thick catarrh would last a fortnight each time. But since I've gone vegan, I still get colds, perhaps 1 or 2 a year, and usually they're gone in a couple of days, and catarrh is no longer a problem. And this I've heard from quite a few of my friends. The current one married, remember, as Barbara said, that she gave up all dairy produce a few months ago, and all of a sudden her catarrh and smelly breath more or less disappeared. But it may be that if you go vegan, you get more vitamins and minerals, and so your immunity is bumped up, your immune response is bumped up, and so you can cope with viral infections better. But there are articles on this. I got several American textbooks of medicine at home where they speculate on this. But again, it may well be that you're less likely to get infections. But
the blood is oxygenating better.
I don't think that is so important, because many people with perhaps chronic bronchitis or emphysema whose blood is not so fully oxygenated, I don't think necessarily get colds more often. And in an aeroplane, I don't think our blood is fully oxygenated. Or maybe we get more colds after a plane flight, but that's probably because of the closed circulation. Yes?
Talking about that, the fruitful diet, the natural diet for human beings.
Fruit? Yes.
Shouldn't is it then true that a raw food vegan diet is actually the natural diet for human beings?
Yes. The question was, if a frugivore has a vegetation diet, then would a raw vegetation diet be more natural than perhaps a cooked one? Yeah, I'm sure you're right. We have largely lost our ability to eat, I think, or at least we have the genetic ability to eat many raw foods, but some of them we probably wouldn't eat because of the vast amount of fibrous tissue and toughness in them. But for instance, you can eat many raw foods if you grate them first. And you can eat raw potatoes or raw beetroot if you just grate it. And what? Or chew it, yeah, but see, Western diet doesn't encourage us to chew. That's one of the reasons, again, why we have so many dental problems. Again, I can quote for myself. I always had great chunks of tartar. Every time I went to the dentist, every 6 months, he hooked great lumps away. Since I went vegan years ago, the dentist, all of a sudden, it just doesn't happen anymore. He just has a little brush around, and so that's fine. And Probably the reason might be because there's a different pH, a different degree of acidity or alkalinity in the mouth, but also because they chew much more. But yes, I would think that any form of processing of food causes some loss of nutrients. But the raw food is full of nutrients. And what is more, and this comes to a question that somebody wanted to ask before about B12. If you eat, as our chairman said earlier, if you don't wash off all the clean dirt, there's probably quite adequate amounts of B12 left behind on fruits which after all undergo fermentation for our needs. And as we can store it for years, we only need minuscule amounts, perhaps in autumn, to keep us topped up for the whole year.
So local diet would help with B12 formation?
It may it may do. I mean, again, I think it would be wrong to assume that, but it may well be. Yes?
There may be foods for camping for that. We said earlier on in the previous lecture that camping has a little B12, probably because of the manufacturing fairly sterile conditions. If you make it with a good deal of ambient bacteria, then you get a reasonable B12 level.
It may be worth your while contacting the manufacturers of these things, if you know them, and putting it to them. You may well be right. Yes?
Suffering pain, and we perhaps we're looking at plants as though they were people or animals. An animal has a very sophisticated system for finding food, finding shelter, avoiding this and avoiding that. A plant requires not food and shelter, it requires light and water.
Yeah.
And in certain senses, it has extremely sophisticated mechanisms for getting enough of these things and for building up its petals and not eating too much and so on.
Yes, no, the plant does have an active endocrine system, plant hormones, which instruct it as to what actions to take. No, I agree on that. But as I said, that we have co-evolved with plants, and it may be that a whole new school of thinkers should arise which examine and think around this problem.
I'm not saying that you're pain, I'm saying we're just looking on question.
Yes, okay, I take your point. Yeah?
On the subject of plant welfare, do they have a central nervous system? And if not, which I suspect they don't, how can they feel pain?
Well, are there any plant biologists here? I don't think they have a central nervous system in the pattern that we have, but they do, I know, make hormones which flow up and down the plant, and the plant tissues follow the instructions, so to speak, dictated by the hormone of opening and closing, or seeking water, or closing the stoma to release less water vapor. Yes? Yeah. I mean, tannic acid, I think, and strychnine are some of the poisons made by plants to ward off. This may be purely an evolutionary accident. There are thousands of that same type of plant, and one of them genetically went a bit wrong and made this chemical, so animals didn't like that and left that alone, and so that was the one that could evolve in that particular niche. But we're getting into evolutionary work now, so... Yes?
You're talking about the infection. There's a small study being done on vegan children in Sweden, and they tend to have less ear infections than lacto-vegetarian children and meat-eating children.
Yes, I think that's probably because they make less catarrh. But I would add one comment on that. I would say that the vegans I've met, there are a whole range of people, from weirdos to nutritionally informed people. And nutritionally informed people, I would say, are fairly intelligent and sensible, and would question the giving of antibiotics to their children for every itch, stitch or twitch that they have. So many doctors, are noted for giving these. And I think that also recurrent ear infections are, well, there are a number of factors, and one of the factors is giving recurrent antibiotics causes recurrent ear infections. And that may be a factor. So it may be multifactorial, but overall I'm sure that the incidence in vegan children of ear infections is much less than average.
Yes, I think it's because the mucus produced by milk drinking.
Yes, milk drinking, I'm sure, does produce a lot of mucus, as I know myself and many of my friends who have changed their diet. And that certainly is a factor. Lady in green.
Going back to the thing about ailments in the diet, high blood pressure in pregnancy is a very common thing. And I think it's that maybe when you're encouraged to take lots of vegetarian friend, when she was having her first baby, about 7 months, she got a yogurt machine and she started eating lots of yogurt and her blood pressure went right up. And yet when she changed her, I think we should go over soy milk, you know, she was starting to go into hospital. And she started cut out all the yogurt and dairy stuff and went on to soy milk. And in a week, blood pressure went down. And I mean, it's just interesting that you can put them right and change diet.
Well,
I wonder if there's any surveys done in vegan markets whether they have less high blood pressure.
I don't know. Does Jill know that one?
I know of one study of vegan women, I think it was done in America, a vegan community, to see if they were susceptible to this problem of seriously higher blood pressure before birth. And in fact they found there was no evidence of more high blood pressure in the pregnant mothers, and in fact I think they found only one case out of something like 300 or 400 women. And so it looks as though possibly a vegan diet may help keep the blood pressure down during pregnancy.
Thank you. Obviously, one case does not constitute evidence, but one of the problems I find is when I talk to medical specialists, and I quote them a case here, a case there, is they say an anecdote proves nothing. And you see, because it proves nothing, they reject the anecdote, whereas maybe there should be something in it. The thing that worries me is that when I quote several cases of personal cases of mine where angina, chronic angina, has disappeared and the person has got back to a brisk exercise. Even one person currently goes running 4 times a week, whereas 2 or 3 years ago he just couldn't go faster than a slow walk. When I mention this to specialists, what they do is often they ask me sort of perhaps rather awkward physiological or biochemical questions which I can't always answer. And then you see, because I don't give a good answer, they dismiss my answer and they dismiss my clinical experience with it. You would think that any real scientist, if I say, look, here angina's gone, when the person adopts a vegan diet, they say, my God, it's fantastic, quick, it may not be true, but give me an idea, I may be able to help my patients. I've never met that yet. All they do is reject, and this is my personal experience. Although the chap that I spoke to on Monday, much to my astonishment, seemed quite intrigued by it. Maybe that with the report that came out in January about from the Rheumatic Council about red meat and cutting out red meat and reducing fat, perhaps some of them are beginning to think a little more about it now. Should I carry on with another theme, or shall we carry on answering questions?
Well, there's 3 theories I'd wish you could comment on. The first one is the Hay theory of separating proteins and carbohydrates. The second one is the theory that the body can't absorb isolated vitamins and minerals, for example B12 intake in the form of tablets or something wouldn't help the body because it can't take the separated thing just in combination with the whole thing. And the third one is that we may overestimate the impact of diet because there's so many people that might suffer psychologically, and the best diet wouldn't even help them because the psychological part of it has a great influence on them.
Well, that's 3 questions. The first one, the Hay diet. I'm not an expert on the Hay diet. I've read Doris Grant's book on the subject. I read quite a number of articles. There's a bit of a paradox here, because I suspect that the reason why the Hay diet works, and I'm sure it does, and many people who swear by it, is because it's not really far removed from the vegan diet. Now you see, the Hay diet, I think, opposes the mixture of carbohydrates and protein in large amounts of each. It's a large amount of one, a small amount of the other. I think that is in principle the Hay diet, isn't it? But also there are other aspects of it. When I read Doris Grant's book, the thing that impressed me was the large amount of good common nutritional sense in the book. The specific theme about the Hay diet was that you don't have, say, a large amount of carbohydrate. If you have a large amount of carbohydrate, you should have a small amount of protein. Well, in my view, in my experience, the vegan diet is quite adequate in protein, but contains less protein than the traditional Western diet. The vegan gets about 10% of his energy from protein. The Western man, the meat eater, gets 20 or in America even 25% of his calories from protein. So the vegan is unwittingly adopting the hay diet, roughly, or perhaps the person who adopts the hay diet is unwittingly making an approach to the vegan diet. So the benefits that the people get may not be specifically as Dr. Hay originally said at the turn of the century, that it's that you can't digest the two things together, because I've spoken to physiologists who say you can, that hay concept is rubbish. I mean, that's not me saying it, that's a physiologist saying it, a gastroenterologist. It may well be that the reason why the hay diet works is because they are actually adopting a diet not all that different from the vegan diet. The second question you asked was about vitamins. I don't know whether, I've read myself that if you take vitamins that are synthetic or extracted from the source and then given as a supplement, they're less effective or don't work. Honestly, I don't know enough about that. I suppose the only way to find out would be totally unethical, to get somebody who's, make them vitamin deficient, and then give them a full proper diet, and then supplements, and then see if there's any difference in response. I don't know the answer. Maybe Jill does, or?
I think there have been some studies where people have been deficient in vitamins and have been given supplements and their blood levels have gone up.
Oh. So that, in other words, vitamins in isolation do work?
It seems as though they can work.
And the third question was something about the psychology of food. What can you remind me?
Not of the food, of the person. Like, if you have a lot of personal problems and stress and things like that, that even the best diet won't help me overcome, for example, an illness.
Yeah, I suppose if you've got a bacterial infection, even if a vegan could handle it more effectively, you've still got a bacterial infection. I don't know, if you've got meningitis, well, the answer is bang in the antibiotic as fast as you can. Of course, if you don't, you may be dead next day.
Well, on this point, there has been experiments done on humans suffering from depression, and to whom we have completely suppressed dairy products, and they have completely cured themselves from depression after stop quitting on animal products.
Oh yes, I've seen that often enough. The number of people who have gone vegan have had quite a marked change in mood. In fact, I've just got a book from America called Mood Control by Diet. I haven't read it yet, but apparently it does confirm, the introduction that I read confirmed what I've seen many, many times. If you get a person to go vegan, you really can get marked changes in personality. I've seen quite a few really dramatic changes in premenstrual tension. One woman in particular always sticks in mind, because I remember the time in 1988, for about 10 years she'd been suicidal for 2 weeks before every period. She really was a difficult case. And I got her to go vegan, and the very next period it all disappeared. And she was like that several years later. I've lost touch with her, but it really was quite astonishing. And I've seen results not perhaps quite as dramatic as that one, but I've seen it sufficiently often to know. And I think one can postulate a biochemical reason behind it. And that, you've heard of the amino acid tryptophan. I think tryptophan, again, any experts here will tell me, is much more likely, is more common in plants than in animal protein. Is that correct? Richest in bananas. Oh, remember that. So anyway, I looked it up sometime. Pardon? Tryptophan, no, but it's present in bananas, and I think it's much more. If you have a plant diet, you'll probably have much more tryptophan than if you have a meat diet.
Right. The bananas are pretty much rich in it, and I've heard someone saying that since he's been eating lots of bananas, he's much more euphoric than he used to be.
May I comment? I've cured myself of anorexia with becoming a raw food vegan. And in the beginning, I would eat a whole lot of bananas.
Okay, well, there may be something worth looking into in this. Now, what I was going to say is this. The tryptophan goes through the blood-brain barrier, gets into the brain, and in the brain it gets converted to serotonin. Now, serotonin is one of you call it a hormone, occurring in the hypothalamus at the base of the brain, and it's involved in the pathway that the drugs that doctors give to treat depression. And apparently, serotonin has been likened to the body's own Valium. Now, what I mean by that is that you know that if you're a bit screwed up and the doctor gives you a Valium tablet, which I hardly have ever done in 40 years of practice, where Valium only came in about 30 years ago, If you give the person a Valium tablet and they're all screwed up, they'll calm down. Well, you see, the body makes its own Valium. And it's the amount of Valium you make depends on the amount of tryptophan in the diet. And also, I think sugar has or carbohydrate has a stimulating effect upon the serotonin production. So if you have a vegan diet, it may well be that you'll be a much calmer, more laid-back person than if you have a rich meat diet. And then my experience in sport may add some credence to this, because I've met many athletes, weightlifters, people particularly who do explosive events, who say that on the day on the day of competition, I need to eat a big pound steak. It really winds me up. And Alexander the Great made a statement that he said, before battle, his men, his commanders, will have to eat only plants, but his troops must be fed meat. He said because the troops who get meat become aggressive, but Alexander the Great's generals had to live on plants because they stayed calm and objective. That may be why Alexander won his wars. And I remember being told some years ago by an army sergeant major that before battle, he always made sure the troops in the war got a good meat meal because it used to wind them up. So again, all this is really sort of fringe or peripheral evidence. But there may be something common. They all have this common theme. There may be something to it. Yes, the lady at the back.
Somebody watched a video Friday night of Michael Thacker from the States. He was talking about this tryptophan and in very violent people in prison that were put on a vegan diet became so much more calmer and compassionate. It just changed their personalities. But I wonder if vegans maybe have too much of it because my they're sensitive about any cardio, it's really hard sometimes to focus, I think.
Well, I've not seen that vegan. I was unaware of it. But yes, I mean, if Michael Clapper, and I should think he has a lot more clinical experience than I have, then I think it's worth very much bearing in mind.
I just wanted to ask, in relation to the hay diet and a lot of the other things you've been talking about, and also psychological changes, is it not to some extent the case that if people expect the diet to do them good, they do feel the benefit, there is a certain placebo effect? Would you give a comment on that?
Well, yeah, that I accept. Sorry, the question was, could there be a placebo effect in having the hay diet? So you had the hay diet expecting that it will help, it will improve your health, and so it'll help. There's been a lot of work on the placebo effect, and I have special interest in this as I told Jill earlier on, because of my work on the drugs and prescribing many, many years ago. And I think it was Professor Dunlop in the 50s who did the first big research project and showed that 30% of people put on the placebo drug had a measurable, a significant improvement compared to when they thought they were on the drug. So that, yes, it may well be, but then this applies to other things. I mean, people have, when the early work was being done on the internal mammary artery graft, when they thought that maybe you could improve the coronary artery blood supply by getting, they call it the internal mammary artery, and grafting into your coronary arteries, that it would help. Now, none of the patients actually, all the patients had some benefit, but angiographic studies showed there was no increase in blood supply to the heart. So then something happened, which I don't know if any of you have heard of, which would not be permitted now, certainly in this country. It was totally unethical. People were waiting to have this internal mammary artery graft, and all the surgeons did, when they saw that there was no change in the coronary artery blood supply, they cut open the people, they cut open the chest, and sewed it up again. They didn't touch anything else. And the response was identical to the response obtained in the former operations where there had been a graft. So yes, I mean, there is a profound effect. And I think most GPs are aware of this. And I'm aware of this. I remember one case where a woman, I was always very chary of overprescribing, and I had the reputation from the late 50s to the 80s of being the lowest prescribing doctor in England. This was a title I was proud of, and in fact the claim was true. But I remember when patients often would, they used to pester me. I knew everyone has to have a cut-off point, and I had my cut-off point. When in the end I just wouldn't argue with the patient anymore. I'd give them something. And so sometimes I used to do something which would today be called unethical. I'd give, say, a water injection or a saline injection and tell the woman that this was the latest drug she wanted. And quite honestly, it was astonishing at times, the dramatic improvement. The person now could permit themselves to get better. You know, they'd atoned, they'd probably had the punishment, they'd had the injection, they've now atoned for their crime, now I can get better. Or for whatever reason. Okay, it's interesting. Most of the themes I won't even touch, but I was told that I should go on to my B12 topic. So let's because this is important, let's discuss a few things about it and see if anything emerges. It is almost traditional to say that vegans are potential sufferers from B12 deficiency diseases, and some textbooks of blood diseases confirm this, although I've yet to hear directly of a person afflicted in all my years of vegetarian and vegan experience. Jill, do you know anyone, any vegetarian or vegan, who has suffered from B12 deficiency, like macrocytic anemia or subacute confined degeneration of the spine?
Not personally, but I understand that Tom Sanders, who's been following a lot of vegans in Britain, has come across a number of cases of people who've been vegan for 20 or 30 years developing some of those symptoms.
Well, it may be then nutritionally related. It may be that as a doctor of 40 years of clinical experience, I've seen quite a number of these things, but none in vegans. It may be that it's purely coincidental, or it may be that in very long term, in people who perhaps had not a fully balanced vegan diet. But certainly it's not a common thing. I think that we have to accept. And all the books I read from, because there are quite a few books on these topics in America. Anyway, this may be due to the relative scarcity of vegans, or to B12 additives in food. Even so, many vegans have told me that they do not take additives. Perhaps they use yeast spreads on bread instead. You would hardly call that an additive, they call it a food item. Anyway, it was 6 years ago exactly that I replied to a professor of haematology whose letter in the British Medical Journal, among other matters, repeated the traditional warning. By post, I asked him how many deficiency cases he had seen, and in reply, he referred me to a major textbook in haematology. In effect, he had not answered my question. No, he said that in discussing a number of blood diseases, vegans have to watch out for B12 deficiency because. So I asked him, and he told me to refer to books, but he didn't answer my question. Right. It seemed to me that the text, as I got to the book that he referred me to, the Encyclopedia of Haematology, was rather vague on this topic, and I suspect it simply repeated, every new edition repeated the warning of the last issue. But why? Look, I will remember when I was a medical student in the late 40s, learning of the recent laboratory isolation of vitamin B12 from liver, and of the knowledge that B12 only occurred in animal products. I remember the excitement it caused, because now you could actually extract B12 from liver and give the patients an injection of it, and some older people here may remember that before that, people with pernicious anemia had to eat, was it several pounds of raw liver a day? It was, yes, they had to, otherwise they would die. This historic event was coincidental with the foundation of the Vegan Society in the 40s. And I wonder if during those formative years, some vegans with limited knowledge of nutrition eventually succumbed to an anemic condition. So therefore, you see, they got in vegans who really probably, again, lived on the cabbage leaf and not much else, because they gave up all other nutrients and didn't understand nutrition, so they had a very restricted diet. They perhaps got some deficiency diseases, got into the textbooks, but in the meantime, a whole vegan vegetarian cuisine was developing, so that the thing didn't occur anymore. But the books just kept repeating it from with every edition. Anyway, from Arthur Ling, from the soy milk pamphlets, I learned that the microbial flora in the bowel of a vegan are more fermentative than putrefactive. Perhaps anyone here a bacteriologist? But again, does this come into your sphere, Jill?
A little bit.
There is, because of the total plant content, there's a greater fermentation process going on in the large bowel of a vegan, than in the large bowel of an omnivore, and that the breakdown process of meat residues is called putrefaction, and that occurs in the bowel of an omnivore, but not in the bowel of a vegan. And because of this, there are certain, not only quantitative but qualitative bacterial differences. And there are two particular strains of bacteria, and I can't remember, it may be, is it Pseudomonas and Corynebacterium? I think these are the two. They have certain slightly different qualities to the other bowel, to the other intestinal flora. Now these two bacteria can ascend into the lower reaches of the ileum, that is the terminal part of the small bowel, and it is here that they form some B12. You see, B12 is formed in large amounts in the bowel. Maybe that's why gorillas eat their stools, but it may be nothing to do with that. It may just be that's what many plant-eating animals do. But certainly, with our diet, it is shown, or some people have shown, that you can form a small amount of B12 in your lower small bowel, which then combines with what we call intrinsic factor, and the two together are absorbed, and that is what prevents the anemia forming. But there's a little more to it yet. Yes, Asian vegans are reported as getting adequate B12 supplies from mouse droppings in their cereal grains and by drinking polluted river water. And B12 is also said to remain on incompletely washed fruits and vegetables. Now, the relatively low, though adequate amounts of protein intake of vegans is also conducive to better B12 absorption. And I think this is established now, that meat protein and the larger amounts of it will reduce B12 absorption. Now, in 1989, I think it was, the World Health Organization recommended intake of vitamin B12 was 3 micrograms, 1/millionth of a gram a day. In 1989, they changed that to 1/millionth of a gram. Are you all aware of this? Right. But the point is, vegans don't need that, and estimates have been made that vegans only need from 1/10 to 1/2 of a microgram. Now that's an interesting figure, because I've also read bacteriological reports that due to fermentation processes going on between your teeth, we also form from 1/10 to 1/2 of a microgram of bacteria, of a B12 between our teeth, which is adequate for our needs. Now, having said that, again, you've got to think of humans not all being identical, a spectrum of them. If you have 100 people, perhaps most people will get by on that amount, but there's a certain genetic variation, and maybe a few at this end will need a bit more than that. Maybe they're the ones that Tom Saunders met, who, because you know, not everyone is 5 foot tall. Some people are 6 or 7 foot tall. Not everyone is 9 stone. Some people are 15 stone. Not everyone is muscular. Some are skinny. And likewise, some vegans may need more B12 than others. And I suspect that the whole thing of B12 is really a storm in a teacup, that most of us just can forget all about it. But having said that, because I suspect there is a certain range of human variation, who is the person on the extreme? I don't know. So it may be safer, play safe, and everyone to perhaps have your Marmite, or at least not that contains too much salt, your Natex, or sort of Barming, or whatever you want to take, and just play safe. It doesn't cost anything, it won't harm you, so why not? Yes, okay, well the other part I mentioned was about gorillas taking their drop-ins, but I say pills before pats. Any questions arising out of that? How flies get theirs? I don't know, you tell me. Well, you've got a point there. Pardon?
What about plastic tape?
Plastic?
I got false tape.
That's an interesting point, although you would still get fermentation going on between them, wouldn't you? But I suppose if you clean them.
No.
No, I never thought about that before. Yeah, it's a good point. But the point is, I still probably from fruits and vegetables, the fermentation going on the fruit skins, I'm sure there's enough there. Otherwise, there just shouldn't be. I mean, there are enough vegans around the world now, in those parts of the world. I'm sure there'd be far more of us dropping down with all sorts of dreaded lurgies. But I mean, I've got a moderate clinical experience of vegan nutrition over the last 15 years, but I just haven't come across this.
One point about skin. So we're told that there's a chemical spraying on all our fruits and everything.
Yeah.
So what about eating the skin of pork?
Well, this actually raises a whole new subject. First of all, though I would prefer to have fruit that didn't have chemicals on it, I think probably this thing is a bit out of proportion. You see, I know that in England alone, 180,000 people a year die of coronary artery disease, or 25,000 die of diabetes, and 60,000 die of strokes, and 50,000 die of high blood pressure. But how many die from these plant chemicals, from these agricultural chemicals? We don't know, but I shouldn't think many. There have been a few rather vague reports that maybe 20 or 30 people a year.
Excuse me, but it's not very objective to say that, because that can play a role in accumulation role in our cycles.
Yeah, I agree with that.
We don't expect that somebody is going to die from eating a pressed carrot.
Yeah, you see, I think, again, now we're coming to agricultural matters, again, I'm touching on a field that I'm not a great expert in, but I can only say I've read around the subject a certain amount. And would agriculture be efficiently, would they be able to make as much food if they did not use agricultural chemicals? I mean, I know, for instance, that if you study the chemicals, the agricultural chemicals in the breast milk of a vegan mother and of an omnivorous mother, the chemicals are a little under half the amount in the vegan breast milk. So certainly there is an effect. Maybe long term they may be carcinogenic. I mean, that's why I said I'd rather not have them. But I gather that there is something that you've got to get it a little in perspective. If agriculture depends on these, until perhaps everyone goes vegan and we need far less agriculture, then maybe it's important. But again, I can't talk here with authority. Yes?
Does all fermentation produce B12? I'm thinking in particular of alcohol. When I drink a glass of cider, am I in fact giving myself a dose of B12?
Well, if you drink several pints of beer, then you get all the B12 you need.
I prefer cider.
Yes. I don't advocate drinking beer, but beer does contain small amounts of B12, but I think adequate amounts. But whether your question was, does all fermentation produce B12? Again, I think you'd have to have a bacteriologist to answer this question.
I can answer that question.
Yep.
Beer's got just about enough of it.
Yeah.
You find your 2 micrograms. The cider's got, cider and wine, you've got virtually nothing. I was reading up on this just the other day. While I'm speaking, can I just make one more small point about animals eating their own stools? Many of us will have observed dogs eating their own stools. We now know that this is for vitamin B12, so that's surely proof that you can't get enough vitamin B12 from a meat diet.
Why B12? You can ask around the shops, and perhaps they'll have some literature on it where they make this product.
Can you repeat what you said? We didn't quite understand.
There's something called a bacterium called torula.
Yeast.
A yeast.
You can buy it in the shop.
Yeah.
Torula yeast.
I wonder if you could write to the company that manufacture it.
That's just natural yeast, nutritional yeast. You can find them in health food stores.
Okay, good. But then on the other hand, I like Natex on a slice of bread, and Natex is really the salt-free type of Marmite, and it's quite rich in B12. So the chap, the fact that you have...
I just wanted to say, I mean, talking about sources of B12 sometimes makes me think that we think more is best.
Yeah.
Like we start forgetting that perhaps finding the proper vitamins or minerals in the foods as they come is the best way to do so. But since we start changing our lifestyle and our food and everything, obviously we have to start talking about it. And I think the main thing to keep in mind is that more quantity doesn't necessarily mean it's better. or to look for sources of B12, whether it's in liver or in any other source, whether it's even vegetarian source, I think it's probably not the way to go.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, personally, I just think that we should always keep that in mind.
No, we should. Obviously, the last line isn't written on the subject yet.
Maybe one more question?
Okay. Just two questions. All right, yes?
Yes, I was just going to ask if any studies have been done in countries in Africa on B12, countries where they only have 1% of their diet comes from animal produce, and they don't get anemia. Have there been studies on why there's millions of people in those countries don't suffer from vitamin B12 problems?
I'm unaware of any. Jill may know of some, but no. Right. But I've in some of the other themes, I was going to talk about calcium in these some of these African societies where they only have about a third of the calcium that we have, and they have 10 children. They'll die at 70 with all their teeth in their head and no osteoporosis. They have 1/3 of the calcium that we have. So the studies are being done, so there may be others. By the way, it's worth knowing that Eskimos have about 3 times the amount of calcium in their diets that we have, and they have a much higher incidence of osteoporosis. It was, as Jill said this morning, it's the protein which is probably the villain of the piece. There was one other question, that lady, yes?
This question has nothing to do with B12, it's a general question that either you or Jill can answer. Are there any studies or reports about the link between either meat products or dairy products and allergies such as eczema and asthma? I know several people who suffer from these things, but and I've heard of the relation, and the thing you were talking about, mucus, makes a lot of sense, but a lot of these people have said to me that things like ice cream and cream and things like that are comfort foods to them, so they don't want to give them up. I know that we can promote, there's lots of alternatives now, but I wonder if there's any written study trying to use that.
Well, yeah, I think there are a number of studies, and I've read reports, although offhand I can't remember any, but certainly things like ice cream, which are probably rich in sugar, are comfort foods, because sugar again stimulates the serotonin. Maybe that's the reason. There's no doubt that these foods, dairy foods, can stimulate production of mucus and so on, but and allergies. And I can just quote you one case history. That was my nephew, my sister's son, who about 17, 18 years ago, she was taken to the doctor all the time. He had terrible eczema in his arms and all the skin flexures, and he was scratching. He was having antibiotic after antibiotic and cortisone creams and so on. And then one day, I can't remember whether I suggested or we cut out all dairy foods. And several years of suffering just stopped in days. The doctor said, it's dangerous, that the child must have these foods, but he's a nice lad. He's tall, slim. Yeah.
We can't hear.
Well, she just says that many people with eczema have better experience if they don't use. I do know that he contributes to the vegan magazine, so if there are serious or important questions, points of interest, it might be a possibility to have those published in the magazine. I don't know if it's really possible, but do write to the editor. And of course I have as a reminder of this lecture also the tea towel. Maybe you have time to join the lunch. I hope you have a nice lunch without too much questions around. But you don't have to use it afterwards.
The highlight of the day, Marion, I've got a tea cloth for you.
Copy. Can you come and see me during the next day or two?
So where are we going first? What's this place?
This is the center of the studio, and these are the two directors, Simon.
Good if